Evening, everybody, and welcome to this session on about iWill ambassadorship and social action, hosted by two young adults who are in St John and have been since we were young people as well, haven't we, Fatima, but are part of iWill as well. So just to introduce you to the session a bit, so we are recording this session to make it useful for cadets and other young people afterwards, but everyone in the audience has their chat and their camera and their microphone automatically turned off, just so we can make sure that nothing is said in this space which we wouldn't want to be on the recording. You should be able to see in the chat space there's a link to Microsoft Form, which has some space for you to ask questions on. If you've got any questions during the course of the evening, if you just click on that link. If you can't see it, it's a very similar link to the one that you used to join this evening. So it's a rebrandly link, sja-ask-iwill. So that's sja-ask-iwill, and would like to see you popping your questions into the chat. So after 2 minutes of housekeeping, Fatima, if I can hand over to you to introduce yourself and start the conversation about social action.
Yeah, so I'm Fatima. I'm a Regional Youth Development Officer for London and South. With that, I'm the coordinator for the Regional Youth Forum, and I also look after the iWill for the region. So anything youth voice, youth participation in the region is something I look after. I'm also part of the NHS Youth Forum. I've been doing that for about 1.5 years now. So with that, I'm looking into digital mental health with the NHS. I'm also an iWill ambassador, as Emma said. So with that, I get to share more social action, bring more opportunities into more young people in St John and elsewhere as well.
Great, thanks, Fatima. So a little bit about me. I'm Emma Jane, and I've been an iWill ambassador since 2015. So iWill started off in 2014 as a new coalition to promote social action in the UK for 10 to 20-year-olds. It's now developed from the campaign in the past 8 years into a movement of people hoping to support grassroots social action with young people leading change in their communities. So I am on the National Youth Team. I'm the new National Youth Participation Lead. And what that means is I look after youth policy and strategy, I look after youth development and youth voice, including some of the youth forums. And I was actually a cadet myself. I come from London and South. I'm originally from London. And so I have that experience of being a cadet, being a young adult. I was a national first aid advocate, I was on the regional youth team, and now I'm working at the national level, facilitating social action opportunities like this. So in terms of my other social action that I engage with, so mine is very young people focused, but also quite health based. I am a trustee of Oxfordshire Youth, which is all about sort of making sure that a charity is running the way that it's supposed to be, but also championing young people and youth voice. I've previously been in Girl Guiding as a young leader, again working with Rainbows who were 5 to 7, they're now 4 to 7, and also with guides at the upper end of the spectrum. And I also, part of my social action is through craft. So I'm part of Octopus for a Preemie, and what I do is I help crochet not quite toys but medical aids to help premature babies recover faster. So I have lots of different social action areas which I look into, and I'm sure, Fatima, you could talk a little bit more about the different areas that you cover as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, for example, I mentioned the NHS Youth Forum. So, within the NHS Youth Forum, we look at 3 different projects per year, roughly. One that I've mainly been involved with is looking into the NHS's digital mental health services, stuff like their websites, for example, but also different providers. So a couple that a lot of people might know, so like Mind, for example. How does the NHS work with Mind to ensure more people have access to digital mental health, especially through COVID? With that, like Emma said, I also was a cadet. So I've been in St John for 6-7 years now, maybe. So I was a cadet in South London, where I spend most of my time, even though I'm in uni now for Sheffield, in Sheffield for uni. With that, I did loads of different opportunities. So I became a District Cadet of the Year for South London. I then chaired the Regional Youth Forum for a couple of years, and then now I sit on the Regional Youth Team. So different areas in social action, as well as within, I'm sure we can both say, our own communities as well. A lot of work we've done there. But overall, I think my main role now is St John.
So I think that's a really broad scope, Fatima. You illustrate really well the different areas, but something I'd like to stress to everyone on the call is that social action isn't the same as volunteering. So if you have a paid role, for example, you might be doing like a Saturday job, or you might be doing a full-time job, or for example, you could think about things that you don't consider volunteering if you're a young carer or an unpaid carer, if you just help someone elderly on your street, if it's that neighborliness, that community mindedness, that civic spirit, all of those things you think of as the word just something, just picking up litter, that is also social action as well. So it's really quite a broad definition of helping make the world a better place. But I think it's really important that we don't put a capital V on volunteering and think about social action exclusively as something that we do through St John Ambulance, as a uniformed organisation, or something that's exclusively for young people. But iWill is there to champion young people making change from the age of 10 to 25 across the UK, however they want to do that in their communities. So, Fatima, where you and I come from a particularly health-focused background, we might have other iWill ambassadors who are particularly focused on gender rights or the environment, lots of different areas of social action that we say simply couldn't cover the breadth and diversity of in the call this evening. But also, I think this is a space for us to unpack what social action means when you are just a young person who puts on your uniform, does something every week, and to celebrate the value of that being special and something in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole being of an iWill ambassador is promoting a lot of the social action that you do and that other people do as well. So you can nominate other people to be an iWill ambassador. It doesn't have to be just yourself. It's a massive range. So someone who's 10 to 25 can be an iWill ambassador. So someone who's 10 is going to have very different experiences to someone who's 25. So there's a massive range of things that you could cover. It might be, for example, working with your local newsstand, for example, handing out newspapers. That can be social action to people that can't reach their local newsstand, for example, necessarily. So there's a massive range of things that you can do with social action, which you mentioned. For me, I see that as you can make that a definition of something, anything you want. So social action can be completely different to one person than it is to somebody else.
And I think the way that I came across iWill was somebody knew me in St John because I was a cadet that did a lot of volunteering. So I was out doing the football all the time, and I was doing a little bit of teaching in my unit where I was an NCO. And they said, "Hey, actually, I think this would be really good for you because the way that iWill works is it's a way of amplifying the existing volunteering, social action, whatever we want to call it, the existing work that you're doing, and giving you that support and that mentoring and that nurturing, but also a community of other like-minded people." So I was really lucky that somebody flagged this to me and said, "Hey, there's a new initiative." Actually, we did have St John Ambulance Cadets go through in 2014, the very first cohort. So St John's got a really extended and really positive relationship with the iWill movement. But I was really lucky that somebody said to me, "Hey, why don't you go for this? We think that you would be really good in this role because of what you're already doing." And one of the reasons why we're hosting these talks tonight is actually it shouldn't be about who you know or what volunteering and social action looks like to somebody. It should really be about young people looking at this definition of social action and saying, "Do you know what? I think I am making positive change in my community." It doesn't matter the size of that change. It doesn't matter the type of that change, whether I'm picking up some litter or doing CPR. If I'm helping to make a change in my community, and particularly if I'm looking around the room and saying, "I don't really see many people who look like me or sound like me or talk about the same experiences as me," then that is what we would hope to achieve tonight, and just empower people to have that knowledge that these opportunities are out there, but also empower people to have that choice and say, "Yes, we want you in the room. Yes, your social action is valid. Do you know what? Keep on doing what you're doing."
Definitely. I think that's what makes iWill so great, is that one, it recognises all the hard work you're already doing, but also gives you some of those opportunities to continue to do more work and bring other young people in as well and show them some of the opportunities that are out there that necessarily not everyone would know about. I think it's really important.
So looking at a question that we've had on the form, so if you haven't submitted your question yet, just a recap of the link if you can't see it in the chat. So it's the normal Rebrandly link which you use to access the meeting, which is rebrand.ly/sja-ask-iWill. If you've got any trouble with that, then just email the email address that was on the poster that you saw. So a question, she's saying, how do you apply to be an iWill ambassador? What kinds of things are people looking for on the application form? And I'd start by saying I don't think it's any one thing at all. Fatima, do you have any ideas? What sort of thing would you advise other young people to put on the application forms?
Yeah, so on the form, there's 3 main questions to me. So what I want to do now is kind of break them down, go through them and talk about what are the questions, number 1, what type of things to ask yourself when answering these questions, but some examples as well. So for example, the first main question to me is, tell us how you first got involved in social action. So here you can talk about, what did you do? So what are you involved in? You can talk about the best parts of your social action journey, but also what you've learned along the way and how it's helped other people as well. So for example, here I spoke about being in St. John Ambulance, being District Cadet of the Year, like I mentioned, attending ABPGs on knife crime, youth conference, etc. But you could also talk about being a cadet in your unit. You could talk about being an NCO, attending leadership courses, any volunteering you've done. So that can be local or national, so attending St. John's Day, for example, your local football clubs like Emma mentioned. But what else have you done outside of St. John, for example? So you could be, I mentioned other things, but do you volunteer at the local hospital? Do you volunteer at an elderly home near you, etc.? Anything that you think counts does. So that can be being captain of your local football team, for example. What does that show and how does that tie back into your social action journey and what have you learned from it necessarily? Is there anything you want to add to that first question, Emma?
Yeah, so something you made me think of was when you said APPG, I realised that not everyone will know what that stands for. So my first question to you was going to be, what does that mean? But the second point I wanted to draw out of that, which is in your application, if you put, I am an NCO, I am a COTY, I am on a RYF, be really mindful that people might not know what a non-commissioned officer, if we use that term, or a senior cadet, people might not know what a district youth forum or regional youth forum is. People might not know what a cadet of the year is if you put it in that kind of acronym. So it's absolutely, as Fatima said, pull out the really specific experience of what you've done, but just remember that you're speaking to an audience who are looking through a real variety of applications and aren't necessarily going to be able to unpick any acronyms that you've popped in there. So just a message about clarity.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing with these applications, especially for someone who's very used to St. John, is remembering that not everyone actually in St. John and outside of St. John will actually know what all of those things mean, like Emma mentioned. So in terms of APPG discussions, that's all party parliamentary group discussions. So with that, it's like having a panel of people with different backgrounds. Some people might have lived experience, political experience, etc., that sit down and want to discuss, for example, like an issue I brought up, which was knife crime in London. With that, what's happening? What can we do to make a change? Who do we need to go to? What's next, etc. Stuff like that is what I really take from APPG. There are loads of different types that they do. It is about catching them at the right time necessarily. The next question with that is, what skills and experiences do you have that make you the ideal iWill ambassador? So with that, what skills have you developed on in your journey, such as public speaking, maybe written communication? It might be that you write blogs, for example. Also, what traits do you have that make you unique? So it might be that you just have to be brilliant at designing posters, for example. Not everyone is. Some people are really good at Canva, for example. How are you connected to your community? So that might be your St. John community, that might be your local community at home, that might be your local unit, you might be a police cadet, for example. All of those are different communities. It might be that the BAME community, for example, that's something that you identify with, so that's also your community. What accomplishments you've had along the way, and why do these skills tie back into being an iWill ambassador overall? So here you could talk about leadership courses, you can talk about looking after younger siblings, you can talk about what you've learned from having a part-time job. Like I said, where else do you volunteer? Are you good at teamwork, public speaking? if you've been on a duty and worked with a patient before, you can talk about your communication, the efficiency of it, how it helped the situation, etc. And anything else that you hope to be involved with as well with working with iWill. Anything you want to add to that one, Emma?
Yeah, I would say that we're really bad at talking about what we're good at, and it can feel really, I'd say, awkward to be saying, I'm an excellent communicator, I am a really good friend to an elderly person down the street, I'm incredibly helpful and supportive, I am, you could say things that you maybe feel a bit embarrassed about and say, I'm actually really interested in local politics, because this is a space where that is absolutely a strength and to be valued, and you're applying to be a member of a community who really value people giving their time and their thoughts and their care into other people and into the world around us. And I'd also say that we're possibly talking from an older perspective. I say iWill is open from the age of 10 up, so something that might seem quite small to some people is actually not a drawback in these applications because they're specifically considering the age and the context of the young person applying. So it could be that you're really passionate about recycling, and the way that that social action is manifested is you run 2 school assemblies. So you actually organise to speak to some of the school leadership team, and you are convincing other young people in your school to make that change by talking about it in public spaces, by role modelling it in the actions that you do. Perhaps you've created a group of people, maybe you've actually started that group and you're leading it, or you're a member of it, and make sure that you talk about the different aspects of that. It's very simple for us to say, oh, I'm a St John Ambulance cadet, but actually to unpack everything that goes into it, to talk about, as Fatima mentioned, all of those different aspects at the level that is appropriate for you is a little bit trickier than people think. And I would also say, when writing this section of the application in particular, if there's a trusted adult or a friend, or there's 2 of you applying together, I'd say, why don't you just remind each other what you're good at and say, oh, but do you remember actually that time when you there was someone who was deaf on the treatment centre patient, and you knew enough sign language to just be able to speak to them and reassure them, and all those little examples that you can really build each other up with.
Definitely. So a lot of time it's not about, like you mentioned, I'm talking about quite a lot of these big things that we've done, but what about the little things that you do as well that really make a difference to someone else's day? That's really important. So question 3, this to me is almost like the final main question, really, the one that kind of ties it all in. So the skills, stuff you've done, why now? So this question is, why do you want to become an iWill ambassador? So here for me, it's, why are you passionate, and what are you passionate about? Why are you passionate about youth voice and social action? But what do you hope to also gain out of being an ambassador? But what can iWill also do to help you reach that goal? So for example, here, I spoke about how I know there's lots of factors that can limit a young people's ability to develop. So social economic factors, education, your race, background, culture, anything it could be. There's so many things that you'd be surprised can be a barrier to a lot of young people. So with that, I wanted to become an ambassador because I've been so lucky along the way to have loads of mentors that have guided me and shown me different opportunities that I can get involved with. I want to start opening some of those doors for other young people as well. So explore those limitations, start bridging a lot of these gaps and become a familiar face in the room. A lot of times you've got to think about when you turn up, for example, in year 7, just having someone else that you recognise on that first day really makes a difference and sets the year off nicely. Be that person for someone else. It might be you necessarily didn't know them before, but they've seen you on the website, or they see you getting involved with iWill, and then they think, okay, maybe that's something I can get involved with too. But I'm also hoping that as a collective, iWill's aim is to empower young people to empower other young people and get them involved and start breaking down some of those barriers that we've let for years sit there and no one's challenged. I do really think that the future is young people, but I also do think it's now as well. What are young people doing now that's making the difference now that's also going to impact our future? Anything you want to add to that one, Emma?
I think you covered that one beautifully. I do have a question for you from the audience though, which is, you make it sound like there's so many things that could go into iWill and your social action volunteering that you sound like really busy. How do you fit what you do with iWill around your social action volunteering? I have to say, I'm sure you can come back to the phrasing of the question, but how does it all fit together?
I think my favourite part about iWill was knowing that it was never a demanded thing that I had to do. I could almost sub in and sub out to things that I was more interested in, for example. So if I was really interested in going to a workshop on journalism, for example, I could do that and still learn from it and not have the pressure of feeling like I know that there's commitment every single week, for example. I could join little subgroups for different things and I didn't have that massive commitment that I felt like every week I had to be a certain time at a certain place. How I tie that all in, a lot of the stuff I do is quite linked. So a lot of it is youth voice. So whether it's stuff I'm doing St. John, whether it's stuff I'm doing NHS Youth Forum, everywhere I go, I'm being a representative for young people that may not look like me, for example, or do look like me. Either way, it's a massive range of young people that I'm always representing. So would that mean it might be my St. John area, I'm representing the young people in St. John, also stuff I'm doing at NHS Youth Forum, or stuff that's happening in my local community for young carers maybe that people don't necessarily know about. But then when I'm going to do different things with NHS Youth Forum, I'm being a St. John representative in that space as well. So a lot of stuff actually linked together, and I can bring in different opportunities in different places and share them with now a massive group of young people rather than just one I was involved with before.
I think that links on really nicely to the question that I was about to answer, which is, I think, a very fair one, which is like, what does iWill do if I had to define it? And I think that it's actually a fairly tricky question, because I'd start off by saying it kind of helps you do everything, but in terms of practically what that looks like as an ambassador, I think there's a real range that I probably need to drill down into. So to give some examples, some of the volunteering and social action that I've been doing lately is, because I was an iWill ambassador through the things I was doing already, I was invited to lead on one of the strands of the government's national, so the English National 10-Year Vision, the strategy, which is called the Vision for Volunteering. And there were 6 different key aspects which they were looking at. And myself and I say volunteering colleague is the phrase I'm using, because it's just, they kind of become friends after a while. But we were both young people asked to lead on this consultation. So iWill was facilitating all of the workshops, and it was providing that guidance and support in the guise of some incredible mentors and people who are absolute experts in what they do. The head of impact, head of working together, head of youth, head of comms, all of these different people investing their time in you because of the aptitude that you have shown, that promise that you've shown, that desire to genuinely help other people. So the way that this culminated was we ran a series of workshops, which is what we've been asked to do. But part of the vision for volunteering is about developing something that really worked for everybody. We realised that we wanted young people to be able to access workshops, and they weren't necessarily buying into the 1 hour in the evening kind of formal idea. So what we did is we said, we're going to completely shake this up, and we're going to run a consultation through Instagram, through Twitter, and we're going to do polls, we're going to do a bit of a takeover, we're going to do some live videos, and of course everybody engaged. I mean, I'm sure everyone is sitting in the room thinking, well, of course young people would rather be on Instagram than sitting in a workshop with a load of strangers. But it's that kind of ding moment where iWill is facilitating so much personal growth and learning, in addition to these incredible opportunities and all of the knowledge that these people are pouring into you as an ambassador, which is just, I mean, it's an incredible privilege. But also it's just genuinely the best feeling when you know that social action and volunteering is something that really fills your cup. It's something that makes you feel good, which is probably why you're volunteering as a St. John cadet or St. John volunteer to start off with. So this ended up with sort of a big launch and a big in-person event after we've done a lot of virtual things. And I think what's come out of that is it's encouraged me to reflect and think about all of the work I was doing before, the volunteering I was doing. And I might actually now go into a job one day. I'm not there yet, I'm still a student, but a job one day that really ties some of these things together. And I've never been somebody who's known what I wanted to do. A lot of my friends know they've always wanted to be, in the police or a doctor or a lawyer, and I've never really had that sense. So something that iWill gave me on top of the personal development and the confidence, the skills and the opportunities, is just a genuine sense of direction through all of it together. So I'm not saying that if you don't know what you want to do, you wake up one day and know. I hope that for you. It was great for me to realise that. but also that iWill is a space, if you already know what you want to do, it's a way to keep on doing that, but with more support and more networks. If I could describe a little bit more what that genuinely looks like. So iWill is a movement which is looked after by Volunteering Matters and UK Youth, which is called the Consortium, and they are kind of the parent structures to the iWill movement who support and underpin it, but all working together for the same thing. And then iWill as a movement is networking with all of these other organisations to bring about change. So as an ambassador, you work together as a cohort of 60 to 80 young people across the UK to get this intensive support in the first year and intensive opportunities from both sides of Volunteering Matters and UK Youth. And then moving forward, you kind of get that ongoing support and connection, often via email or via Teams, but in-person volunteering opportunities as well, to go to APPGs, like you said, to run workshops, to take part in consultations, to put your voice to things. And we'll come back to this point because I've talked enough at this stage, but thinking about that digital space as well and virtual campaigning and that voice of social action, it really facilitates it in all of those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, for example, in a couple of weeks, I'll be joining the Community of Practice Networks. I'll be going along as an iWill representative, talk about health, social action, and structural racism, which is stuff that I'm really passionate about. So being part of iWill is giving me that opportunity to actually go into a different room that I normally wouldn't go into and share some of my thoughts as well. I think there's a massive space right now for young people in a lot of rooms that necessarily weren't open to them before, and a lot of people do want to hear what young people are thinking. I think COVID showed a lot of us that young people are dedicated to something, they are motivated, and they really do want to make a change, and it's really effective when they're given that space to.
Yeah, I think, and this ties into a question I'm about to ask, that you're completely right about opening doors, sometimes in a very literal sense, but also just generally thinking about building the future that we all want to be part of by doing something about it. Everyone talks about young people are the leaders of tomorrow, and iWill says, well, what about now? What about today? We're not waiting for anything. Let's support other people. Let's pull them up to fulfill their potential right now. So the question I've had is, if I'm a young person who struggles to express myself, for example, I'm dyslexic, will that affect my application?
No. So with the application, for example, it can be in Google Forms, or you can submit it through email. With that, you can submit it in any format that you so wish. So it might be that you choose to bullet point things. It might choose that you choose to write a paragraph, for example. But it doesn't have to be a long speech. It doesn't have to be a long application at all. They just want to hear from you. So what works for you is what will work for them as well. So there's no favoritism in anything. It just might be that, for example, here we're talking about speech on what you've learned from it is the most important bit really in it. What you've learned from it and what it means to you as well.
And this is where I'd come back on the advice, which is if you can get someone else to check it through with you and ask them to be really honest with their feedback, that constructive criticism, that's a really good opportunity to make sure that you're showcasing the genuine good in yourself. And I think that's something that St John Ambulance is pretty good as an opportunity for young people, is that you don't have to be good at English to do first aid. It's not necessarily about intellectual skill, it's about that willingness and that practical skill. So it shouldn't be a barrier to accessing more opportunities. And I think the iWill team are really attuned to not how you're expressing something, but what you're genuinely trying to express.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it impacts it at all. If anything, it's another motivate for you. So it's an experience that you've been through, you are going through, and you're sharing with other young people. There's definitely going to be at least one more person that's recognizes that and now wants to get involved as well.
I would say also, I think the iWill team reflects that. There's actually a real range and diversity of experiences among the staff team across UK Youth and iWill. So I think the organisation is not just putting its money where its mouth is in terms of that structural support, but you can genuinely feel confident that there's somebody you can find to talk to about things and who will understand your experiences as well. So just with the form, I'm not sure if everyone can see the chat now that I have turned it off. So the form link is at rebrand.ly/SJA-ask-iWill. I'm not sure I've had the questions are anonymous, so feel free to click on that link and drop any more questions that you have. We've had some really good ones come through this evening, but I'm sure there's a few other questions that you've come along hoping to hear the answer to tonight.
Yeah, I mean, one question I'll share with you, Emma, is what is your favourite thing that you've done with iWill? So I know you've been an ambassador for quite a long time now. So what's your favourite thing that you've done?
That's a really tough question. I think it probably would have to be meeting the group of people who I'd been working with on the Vision for Volunteering since last August. I've been working with them for over 6 months, and then actually going to, it's called an expo, so it's like a big display of all of these different stalls, a bit like a school fair or a freshers fair, going there and actually being given the stage as 3 young people with completely different experiences to talk about what volunteering means to us and to talk about how the face of social action needs to change, because that was actually, I think, maybe the bit after, it was a really incredible experience to do that, but I had such a rush of warmth, of positivity, and people came up to me afterwards and said, do you know what, you really made us think. In a room full of, so if I explain a little bit more about the day, there was a big stage in the middle of kind of like the arena, the big curtains around it, and there were lots of stores around the outside, and people had been going up to the stage throughout the day with like a timetable and doing a presentation, and lots of them had been adults, and lots of them were adults in suits, to be honest, saying, well, you know, we've got a strategic 5-year plan or a 10-year plan for volunteering, and we've got collaboration and coalitions. And 3 of us got up and we asked a lot of questions, and we said, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? What is the face of volunteering to you, and why is it that face? We also asked people to say, sit down or stand up or raise your hands if you've ever had any of these life experiences, and ask everyone to look around the room and say, can we just sit with the experiences in this room and to think about how we all got here today, and to think about who might not be here today and where we want everyone to be in 10 years' time. It was so incredible to be offered the opportunity by iWill to stand up for a room full of, to be honest, quite important people and ask them to make things better for everyone that was coming after them. It was just, yeah, pretty phenomenal, pretty phenomenal.
I think also seeing the change that comes from that as well. So seeing them actually follow it through is a massive impact. I think it was boost your confidence to know that they were listening and they did care.
I was really surprised. I got an email a couple of weeks ago because I'd said, oh, you know, I then went to an APPG, the parliamentary group, and spoke at a committee with Nigel Huddleston, Minister for Civil Society. And I actually sent an email saying, oh, thanks for putting me forward. And they said, we didn't put you forward. Someone at the expo was so impressed by what the iWill ambassadors achieved. They specifically asked you to go because they knew that it was more important to send a young person, those young people, to go. And I was like, wow, that's absolutely incredible. And I said, yeah. And they said, more than that. So someone asked me, more than that, but I know 2 organisations who have completely ripped up their plans because of what you said in that room that day, and they're just redoing everything. Yeah. Actually, we talk so much, don't we, about, you know, the power of youth, you know, young people being great, social action being great, but actually to understand that 2 really powerful organisations have just started over again. It's the ability to make genuine change. That's it for me. We could sit and talk all day about what we'd like to see, but the fact that someone out there was moved to go and do it, that's incredible.
That is genuinely incredible. I think it almost starts a domino effect as well for other people to see it as well, that actually things are changing. Wow. I think I would say one of my favourite things really is actually just doing the workshops. A lot of time with social action, I feel like I'm always out doing things, but just being able to sit down for a couple of hours and have someone teach me, for example, the importance of how to write an article properly. I mean, one I always remembered is I went to an article with a journalist from the news, and she writes a lot of articles and she makes really cool titles and kind of showing us what makes things stand out, what catches people's eye, what makes them want to share it, etc. It was really cool for me to see a completely different perspective to it, but also then be able to pass it on to other people as well, so I can go back and share it with you, for example, and help them in terms of their social media outreach and what they can do with that to reach more young people as well.
I think a thread that I'm picking up between the 2 ads is it's that multiplier effect. You're already doing something, you join a community of people who are doing things, supported by teams of people who are doing things and want you to do that thing as well, and ask you to pay that forward and to pass that on. That's really capturing the spirit of social action about how do we do this together, because doing it alone is not an option.
It's definitely not an independent system. I almost call it interdependent. There's so many different areas with it that do so many different things, but we all work together with the collective aim of promoting youth voice and youth social action. Brilliant.
We could talk all night, couldn't we?
Yeah. It's just a platform. I think it's a really great platform that hasn't always been there for young people. That gives them that space to be recognised and for people to see this is what young people are doing, this is the impact we're having, and this way we're going to go with it, and how can you help us do that? It could be young people across the country. They're doing completely different things, but somehow when you're put in that room together, you're actually talking about the same thing, and the power of the masses, really.
You make a good point that actually iWill is something that we perhaps take for granted, but it's, you know, it's 8 years old soon. And at the time it was, I think when I spoke to, I mean, one other thing that really touched me is some years ago, the CEO took time to ring every single iWill ambassador and speak to them for an hour on the phone. And in my conversation with her, I spoke about how I was basically dreamt up on the back of a bus, you know, about we should really do something. And it's that momentum, that energy that's been carried forward about iWill empowering others to do things. So it's brave and it's new, experimental, it's youth focused, because one of the reasons I'm on the St John Ambulance National Youth Team as a volunteer is I really think that young people's attitude to the world is genuinely that openness, about that willingness to try to put themselves forward, to be brave, to learn, to experiment, to work together. And I think that's something we could do much better at hanging on to. Like, even when, you remember when you turned into a teenager, you turned into an NCO, and then you just edging out the edge of NCO and aging out into an adult, and you turn around and you're like, gosh, you know, all these people seem so young. In a way, badges seem tiny, 10-year-old cadets seem tiny, but remembering that when you were that age, you were just as good. And that's why 10 to 25 is a really good range to capture young people driving that change forward. But back to iWill being brave and new, and coming back around to that digital conversation, it's not just a supportive environment, but one that is really well set up. So if you want to do a takeover on iWill social media, they entrust you with the password and the logins and say, you can do your campaigning on our platform with, you know, thousands of followers. You can reach them directly because we are offering you that pre-built channel. You don't have to do all of that work yourself, because we're here to support you practically and amplify you in addition to all of the personal development we're offering.
Definitely. And I think one thing that you can always associate with young people is how good they are at using social media. So having iWill be, you know, not only just everywhere, but also having it that you can access it on social media as well, makes it really accessible for a lot of young people who are on social media all the time. You're seeing it, you're seeing what other people are doing with it, and you can also jump on it, like Emma said, doing takeovers. So really good with that. It might be that you're going somewhere else and doing something else, or you might be doing something local, or you're working on something at home. Share it with other young people. I think one thing you always know with young people, anyone in general, is if I'm thinking about something, it's very likely at least one more person in the room is thinking about it too, or at least one more person wants to make the same change that I do. So it might be, like I said, that you didn't know the person before, but you've been to an iWill meeting with them, and actually you realise we have a lot in common and we have a lot of ideas that we would like to share, working together. Only good things can come from that.
Well, I say I'm laughing now because we've evidently made it sound pretty good, because we've had a question which is like, so what could be better? What would you change in the way that you do your volunteering social action with iWill? So I can start this one because it's a really easy one for me. I joined iWill in 2015, and it was a really busy time in my life, so I couldn't necessarily I didn't know if I was going to be able to travel to London to do all the bits and pieces in person. So I didn't really know anybody for a little while. And after my year was up, I kind of thought it was like, you know, like you go for a year on a youth forum or you go for a term in Parliament. I kind of thought that was it, like after a year, and that they just left me on the mailing list or something. So I kept getting all of these opportunities and just thought, oh, well, that's really interesting to see what's going on. But, you know, I know that these are for other people. And it turns out that iWill is actually an organisation that continues to support you. Kind of once you are an ambassador, you're part of that network organically, naturally, automatically. So these opportunities were for me the entire time, which is really funny looking back. And it wasn't until 2020 when a lot of our social action moved online and they said, Emma Jane, we are sending an email personally to you. Are you still interested in doing this stuff? And of course, I wrote back and said, yeah, I'm really interested. And they were like, okay, because you really notice you haven't been engaging for, for a bit. Have you been on a break? And I was like, well, I've always been doing this stuff, but maybe it'd be really helpful for the team to have like just checked in explicitly. So that's definitely something that's happening now. But I do think that if I could have changed something back then, it would have been maybe the information I got up front. I didn't have a talk space like this to really tell me what the structure of it was and who was in charge. And I could have been braver and just asked. But it feels awkward, doesn't it? Particularly when everyone else feels like it sounds like everyone else what's they're going on. How could it ever be this? So I think it could have been clearer to me at the time what iWill was really doing. But I know that's something that some of the reasons we're doing these talks I'm hoping to change.
That's really interesting that you said that, because I mean, you were talking about years ago, but going through it now, we are in contact with the it's called the adults a lot more often, and they do check in with us and personally check on what we're getting up to, which I find really effective. Because sometimes I just need a little bit of poke when I'm getting involved with other things to remind me that, oh, actually I can still do that, and I do have the afternoon off with something. So that's really effective for me. I think if there was something I could change was, I don't know. But maybe it could be more social, just socially hanging out with more of the ambassadors outside of our typical meetings and stuff that we do, or maybe seeing them at a different event, just spending more time with certain people that maybe close to me. So in London, for example, I think that could be something that could be changed very quickly, though. Just takes some time to sort it out.
You're right. I think it possibly takes a bit of bravery on the side of an ambassador just to say, hey, do you fancy emailing or whatever? But I realise that that's when you think about it in the abstract, it's really simple to be like, why didn't I just email one of the facilitators and ask them to introduce us or to work on a project together? Because that's how I'm now in contact with lots of my iWill friends. Like I see them on Twitter, which is where I do a lot of my volunteering in that space, shouting about Youth Voice, but also again, I hadn't met some of these people in person after 6 months of working with them. We could have done a lot better to find that social time, but it's also, as you say, a really easy fix.
Yeah, it's really fix. It just takes time sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a useful thing to unpack when we talk about being part of a community. What does that actually feel like and look like in person? So, for example, as someone who is leading the National Youth Forum and you run a regional youth forum, we know just how valuable it is to have that social time when you're not just in a meeting. It's that organic conversation and that sort of that how many ideas have you sparked just by having that chat with somebody in an unstructured space?
Yeah, and building some of those rapports that you necessarily wouldn't have expected, for example, in stuff like icebreakers.
I haven't had a new question yet, so I wonder if you've got a question for me you would like me to answer.
Ooh.
I will, in the meantime, recap the form link in case anyone hasn't written it down. So you can email nationalypteam@sj.org.uk, which is the email that was on the poster, or the https://rebrand.ly/sja-ask-iwill if anybody has not yet submitted a question and would like to ask one in the next 10 minutes, because somehow we're already in the last 15 minutes of our session.
We'd love to have some real questions, whether it be about just our experiences, the application process, etc. That'd be really cool to hear from a lot of you. I think my question for you, Emma, was what would you like to do with iWill in the next year? What's like your main goal?
In the next year. Oh, well, this is kind of half touching on a top secret project, but I don't mind telling people. I would like to, because I'm now on the St. John youth team, I would like us to work a bit more loudly isn't the right word, but I'd like to shout a lot more about our collaboration, starting with evenings like tonight, which are run by St. John young people and young adults who are also in iWill. So we have these talks not 2 weeks before the deadline, but as a regular space for social action conversations to occur, to inspire other young people to do that. And I think that's something that with my St John hat on, I can organise and say, right, well, we need nationally, we need 3 teams, here's all the backgrounds, but actually as an iWill ambassador, I'm hoping for that to go both ways and say, where can we really strengthen those partnerships and those spaces for conversation, which at the moment I think iWill kind of relies on supporting people who are already doing that work. And I want to kind of look around and say, hey, we could do much better as iWill ambassadors at talking about what we're good at. So let's start having those conversations very loudly, very publicly, very accessibly for people to just drop in and find out.
That was my point as well. I definitely agree. I think having more youth organisations work together could be massive. It could have a massive impact and a massive change for a lot of young people. Just bringing up stuff like iWill and different organisations, what they're doing and how it differs or it's similar to St John is great. I think the more opportunities, the better for young people. It's not necessarily all about what we're doing in St John, but how can I use some of the skills I've gained from being a member in St John and bring it to other organisations and other things that's happening and share it with them as well and bring other young people along as well.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's about bringing everyone with you. I've just had a question, which is, can I be an iWill ambassador if I don't like public speaking? Do you want to take this one?
Yes, you can. I think public speaking is a massive thing that a lot of people aren't very comfortable with, but that also comes with just time, experience and practice. But you don't have to be great at public speaking to be an iWill ambassador. There's so many different opportunities that you can get involved with that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do any public speaking, for example. That's just something that I'm really passionate about. So that's what I mostly get involved with. But like I said, just attending a lot of the workshops and stuff and working in small groups with other young people and gaining experience and knowledge from them as well and just sharing it in between you. It would be a massive thing. And it's a confidence builder for yourself as well that could help you in different areas as well, in different things that you're doing.
I would also answer and say that I quite enjoy public speaking. It's something, as you can tell this evening, I'm quite happy to just chat, particularly about social action and volunteering. But I'd also describe myself as someone who recharges quietly with a book or with some craft or in a relaxing space. So it sometimes feels quite full on and quite busy to have to talk to people all the time. And one of the highlights of my week is charity hour on a Wednesday, which is something that runs through a hashtag on Twitter, and my social action in that space feels like networking for people who don't want to network. It feels like having a conversation with other people who I haven't met, and you know what, maybe I will never meet, although I've started meeting them in person. That's really incredible to say, hey, I met you via charity hour because I know you're interested in charities and volunteering and social action. So it builds those networks before you get back into the real world, which is always helpful. But also you can opt in and opt out. You don't have to apply to some of the questions. You don't have to share a photo. You can drop in and answer 3 and then just leave. You don't have to have your camera on. You can be answering a message on the tube. You could be getting ready to get on a coach across the country and actually say, I'm going to spend the first hour just speaking really loudly in the spaces that are right for me about things that I'm deeply passionate about. And we've also had really successful iWill ambassadors in the past. So Dara has actually written a book. His book's called Diary of a Young Naturalist. And if your creative medium or your expressive medium is best written or filmed or typed out somewhere on the internet, then that is just as valid as standing up in front of a group of people and saying the same thing, but in a space on that page, on that phone, where you feel more comfortable. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what makes it great is it's not a one size fits all. It's an everyone can do anything that works best for you and tailor that to you. Great.
Yeah. Something else I've been asked is what you've talked about the skills and qualities and knowledge that you might find helpful to put on an application, but what kinds of things would be really helpful to be an iWill ambassador? What kinds of knowledge, what kinds of skills, experience, qualities do you think are really important for iWill ambassadors?
I think to be an ambassador, one, you just have to be motivated, passionate about it, passionate about young people, youth voice, social action, wanting to make a difference. That could be in a massive area. That could be a massive category, for example. It's like overall climate change. But some of the smaller things as well that might be important to you as well. So it might be that in your local area, feel like there's not a youth centre necessarily that is open to young people. Okay, well, what's an alternative that we can do? What other opportunities are around in my local area that I can share with other young people around me who get involved with that too? I think it's important to be not necessarily actually confident, but I think that's a skill that you can work on and develop over time. It might be that you might be particularly confident in one area. So it might be that you're really good at technology, for example. It might be that you're really good with social media, for example. But being able to share those skills so that other people can learn from it as well is really important. I think having almost almost like a plan. Like what's your main goal of something that you would really like to achieve? So like I asked Emma, what's your next 1 year plan? So what's your plan over the next year? As an ambassador, what do I want to have achieved? It might be that you want to learn something. It might be that you want to share things. So for example, my main focus this year has been sharing opportunities with other young people and passing on so they can get involved. Whilst the next year, for example, my plan is to actually share more youth organisations with different youth organisations, make more noise about what's happening and the cool things that we do when we work collectively together. Any other skills do you think?
I like to reframe confidence as convinced and convincing. You don't have to feel confident, but you really have to believe in it. And the convincing element of it is, okay, well, what have you done so far? Does it sound like you want to be doing it? And do you know what you want to carry on doing in future? So you don't have to say, I am a confident person who's a skilled communicator, like you've just walked off of the street with word salad in your mouth. I would say being authentic is really important and sounding really convinced about what you want to do. People know that I like talking about volunteer and social action because I smile when I'm talking about it. When I'm writing on the page, I could write lots and lots and lots, but also the words that I'm using, the things that I'm talking out, it's obvious that I've had that experience and I genuinely care. So I talk about your passion, your experience, your motivation. I would also say that to be an iWill ambassador, you have to be a good listener and you have to genuinely be listening, deep listening, present listening, intentional listening, because you're going to be in spaces where not everyone agrees with you. And sometimes you're in spaces where people are nice to you as a young person, but like, oh, well, it's just because a young person thinks that. And sometimes it takes a little bit of energy to push back and say, no, I'm really very serious. This is something that affects me. It's something that's important to me. This is something that affects and is important to lots of people out there, even if you don't think that right now that's the most impressive and most important and pressing thing for you. So being a listener and saying, okay, how can I bridge those divides? How can I come to a compromise? How can I listen to their concerns and genuinely address those and say, well, actually, I just think you should do this thing. It's about that authentic relationship building. And it doesn't have to be in person. Like I say, it can be however you like, but being someone who's motivated and dedicated, being someone who is a good listener, and I'd say somebody who is a little bit creative. And I think that this is something, particularly if you're thinking about the field of neurodivergence, everyone's like, okay, well, I think in different ways or I behave in different ways, but a really key thread that runs through a lot of neurodiversity is about that ability to think outside the box, to approach things differently and to be creative. And that is a real strength if you have that in you, and something you should be saying, do you know what, the way that I understand and interact with the world is something that will be of benefit to other people because they probably won't have seen that before. And even if you don't consider yourself to have that, the ability to be flexible and respond to that creativity, so being creative and being flexible in the time that you give and the people that you work with, in the ideas that you're doing, just saying, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, let's do that, and directions, which I think can be a real strength as well.
Yeah, I mean, with listening, I think what comes with that as well is being okay with asking questions. I think opening some of those doors, and asking questions that maybe other people wouldn't feel too comfortable about asking. So, you know, like you said about going to Expo and talking to some of these people that you typically would have almost avoided at these big events, but asking them these questions and really wanting to make that change. And like you said, speaking outside of the box, you know, think outside of the box with that. So it might be that when you're looking at young people and this, you know, almost box that's always been assigned to us, and they're stepping outside of that box and almost going against the societal norm and really saying, I'm a young person, but I still want to make a change. I think that's really important. That's just a really important skill.
This feeds really tightly into my last question for you, because we are just 5 minutes on the end. So if you've got any final questions that you want to pop on the form or send over by email, please do. So what are you doing in St John Ambulance right now that you would say is social action? If somebody said, what's your best example of social action right now, because you need to apply to become an iWill ambassador all over again, what example would you give?
I think my main one right now would be my regional role. So, you know, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think my main thing is the fact that I'm working with the Regional Youth Forum and I'm empowering them to learn, but also make a change for other people in the region. But also some of the EDI stuff that I do in the region. So just making noise about accessibility needs, for example. What does EDI stand for? Again, working with Carol, our national EDI lead, on little projects that she's working on, for example. Just making, I guess, noise is what I would say mainly is the biggest thing I'm doing right now in St. John, and just making people that typically wouldn't have thought about it have to think about it, but also changing their mindset and making them want to actually make a change as well. But ultimately, it's just better for young people.
I have so many things that I do that I find really exciting that I could pick from, but I think the one that I'd have to settle on is possibly the Cadet Reporters project, which is a brand new project that went national in February of this year, which gives young people training to become sort of mini journalists, to use the cameras and the recording equipment to write and to perform and to design, because that is opening a space for young people to talk about being in St John Ambulance and to talk about social actions. That's facilitating that conversation, but very specifically, it is providing a group of young people with an opportunity to be heard that is structured and supported in a way that has never existed before. So now we can book a camera and organise a young person 2 weeks beforehand to go to St John's Day and stand there and interview the CEO and say, what does St John mean to you? Why is it important that we have cadets and young people in our organisation? And just asking those questions right at the heart of power, I think, is something that I'm really proud to be a part of and to facilitate. So again, I say that a lot of my social action is very youth focused and a lot about health volunteering, more on the youth focus side. It doesn't have to be. Obviously, the reason we're here tonight is because we both work with young people, and I will are looking for 10 to 25-year-olds across the UK to be those change makers in their communities. But it really can look like anything. And I'm sure if you ask the Cadet Reporters, each of them has got their own interests, whether that's fighting poverty or homelessness or having those discussions about LGBTQIA concerns. Every single one of those young people is then having a new social action conversation somewhere, and it comes back to that multiplying effect.
I'm really looking forward to hearing about all the different ambassadors you join in the following year. Do let us know as well what you're up to, how you get involved with iWill, and the bigger community that we can create in St John of iWill ambassadors. The more change we can make, the more people that we can get involved with, and continue pushing out different things as well.
No, absolutely. And what I would also say is that we're not building up to one big ending here, one big cut-off, one deadline. You're here tonight because you're already interested in volunteering and social action, and probably in St John Ambulance as well. You are already engaged, and no matter what happens in the next couple of weeks or months or years, it's about you feeling empowered to carry on with that journey, like we are, like the networks that we're building of people who are informed, engaged and supported in order to be able to achieve all those wonderful things. So it's 9 o'clock already, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening to what I hope will be the first of many exciting conversations about what we do, why we do what we do, and why you should do it too. I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. As I say, we have been recording this talk, so hopefully this will become available to more young people in the next couple of weeks or so to facilitate more conversations about social action and about iWill. But if you do have any feedback or any questions in the interim, please do drop a message through the email address that was originally on the poster, nationalyp@sj.org.uk. Hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. You're free to go. Take care.
Take care. Thank you for coming.